much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. And now here's your host, Rich Barris.
Yeah, welcome to Inside the Numbers, folks. I didn't think there'd be a show today. I didn't think there'd be an Inside the Numbers. Didn't think I'd be back in time, but got back in time, so here we are. It's Freewheeling Friday. Get your Q&A questions in. Laura, who will be in the chats, plural, in a second, will grab them and send them to me, and I'll also try to keep an eye out for some of them. All right, so get them in now. Before we get started here, I thought we'd just take it kind of like freewheeling today. I do want to finish up, well, not maybe finish up, but continue on with our questionnaire, which then we may have a, well, we'll invite them all. We'll see. We'll see if we can get these nomination candidates to come on Inside the Numbers. I know some that will already. All right, everyone will be treated fairly, but I think it would be good if we have them on after we run the nomination polling, and then maybe all experiences are well. Then as we continue with the tracking, nomination tracking polling, and hopefully be able to get into the states when we actually get to voting, that they'll make a habit of coming on as they remain in the horse race. All right. Before we get into that, though, we're talking about the 1-year anniversary, of course, of the invasion in Ukraine. So, of course, there's polls out there. There's thoughts and concepts out there. Without a doubt, folks, this coalition, this pro-war coalition, which I would say it's pro-war. There's just a lot of people who would say, oh, I support Ukraine, but don't really know what that means, and certainly would not support them if it meant higher gas prices, if it meant World War III, if it meant committing boots on the ground, if it meant all of these things, that it really does mean that the media and Western propaganda do not want people in the West to know. So looking at a poll that just came out, the field poll in Canada, for instance, it's a very, very small coalition that believes that the West, NATO, their country, any of this should be engaged in this. It's about 30%. Should be engaged in this conflict against Russia. All right, so who do these people, with all of Western media banging the war drums and the propaganda that they have been able to push, and you have to give it to them, it's pretty impressive. Who do people believe is winning this conflict? All right, so about a year out, we now have a new survey by Rasmussen reports that came out this morning, and I would like to go over it because actually I find it interesting. I'm not surprised by the percentage of people who think that Ukraine is winning this war. But what is noteworthy is the change from a year ago. Even with, let's just face it, the propaganda has been enormous. War propaganda is among the most powerful propaganda. It's the most difficult to combat historically. It has been. Something like COVID would be up there. Public health crisis propaganda would be up there. But war propaganda, we have a very long track record where we could go back and we can always find these periods where support for conflict explodes, whether it's the president, it's the media, it's both, really coming together and building a coalition of support for conflicts that then later collapse totally, okay? The Gulf War, Vietnam, you can go back as far as ever. The Gulf of Tonkin, WMDs. See, here they are. They're right in my hand. You can't see them? Right? So ultimately, that stuff collapses. Even Afghanistan collapsed, folks. The war in Iraq, the invasion over WMDs, one of the biggest collapse. And on and on and on. So it's interesting to see this as we get closer now. So here we are in the 1 year. Here's Rasmussen, and I'm going to give you some of the trends, all right? All right, so Russia invaded Ukraine in February last year. Who is currently winning the war, Russia or Ukraine? Russia's at 19%, Ukraine's at 21%. 46, so basically even. 46% say it's a stalemate, and a pretty sizable 14% say they're not really sure. Well, folks, hold on. Last December, just a few months ago, about a third said Ukraine was winning. And the stalemate was only 38%. And so where are we now with the handling of this thing? Is the United States doing too much or not doing enough to help Ukraine fight the Russian invasion? Too much, 35%. Already, not enough has fallen to 28%. About right is 28%. So support for doing more has completely collapsed. There's not much more that can be done unless we give them F-16s, which means we will be directly involved in this conflict. I went on an absolute tirade on Wednesday about how Tony Blinken and this administration have predictably sealed a balancing coalition and alliance between Russia and China, which also would include, by the way, Iran, if we're talking about global great power conflict, and probably India, even though India hasn't, I don't believe, taken a real side yet. I believe if we were talking about total global conflict, I don't believe India would feel that we're the safest bet at this moment. So for that specific history, so-called history, expert that we were talking about last Wednesday, he said they wouldn't do anything because China wouldn't be so dumb. They wouldn't want to start a war, right? Over Russia. Well, in fact, that's not true. So now China has announced they will be giving them quite a bit. Der Spiegel's reporting that Russia and China are in negotiations for China to supply Russia with suicide drones, at least, for use against Ukraine. It obviously would be a major escalation, and we'll wind up reading that article in a second here when we're done, before we move on to the poll, okay? Oh, God, this is like unbelievable. The ads. I understand everyone's going to make money, but my God, the ads. All right, anyway, moving on. Who is saying we're not doing enough? There are clearly more Democrats saying that not enough is being done than anybody else. All right, but still, and Republicans are saying too much is being done, as are conservatives, so more than others. But for the most part, it really does go hand in hand with this idea I've been trying to expose everybody to. Now, what is the modern warmongering coalition in the United States? And that is as follows. Politics make strange bedfellows. They do. You have neocons like Nikki Haley allying, engaging in a coalition building effort with neoliberals like Joe Biden. And I would argue that Bill Kristol and others, the term neocon is like a little bit confusing because there's nothing conservative about them at all. So you have the Max Boots and the Bill Kristols and the Jonah Goldbergs and blah, blah, blah down the line. They never really were conservatives. They're not from conservative stock. Irving Kristol was a radical left-wing communist, basically, and that's that's Bill Kristol's daddy. He believed in big government at home, but the primacy of U.S. power abroad. But for the most part, they have always been domestic lefties. Always. All right. How would you rate President Joe Biden's handling of the situation in Ukraine? Only 19% give him excellent marks. Another 22% give him good remarks. So you're looking at about 41% of the country say he's doing a good, somewhat, at least a good job. Whereas poor is 37%, fair is 17%, and only 4% are unsure. Right. So you clearly have a 54% majority who say that he's not doing great. All right, just to give you an idea of where that, I do have the trend for that. All right, I believe I do. Hold on, bear with me. I believe I do. Coffee, definitely need my coffee this afternoon. Nah, it looks like they're basically, and as they wrote in their thing, Rasmussen said, this is basically identical, okay? Basically identical. All right, so I find this to be rather interesting considering the amount of propaganda that people have been exposed to, that Russia was losing. If you remember, the Russian army was supposed to be disbanding by now. They were supposed to have been starved to death by now. They were deserting in droves. They shouldn't even have an army by now. Do you remember all of this? Meanwhile, really, where are we? 1 year from the anniversary of this thing, we're looking at photos and videos online of massive number of dead in Mariupol on the Ukrainian side. All right. Now, what impact has this had over the last year? China reportedly negotiating with Russia to supply kamikaze drones. The U.S. and Germany have warned China not to deliver weapons to Russia. So what? This is what Wang Yi just said the other day. They tried to engineer some kind of like diplomatic sabotage effort against Wang Yi. The Germans and the United States did. And Tony Blinken has a very long history of doing this in an attempt to really shut down diplomacy. I mean, that's what Blinken's aiming to do when he pulls these little... They're stunts. They're diplomatic stunts. I don't know how else to characterize them. But it didn't fly with Wang Yi, and he was basically like, up yours. You're weak. You're in a position of weakness. This is now the second time I basically have to bend you over my knee and spank your little bottom. We'll do what we want with Russia, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. And why can he say that? Because it's true. According to information obtained by Der Spiegel, however, Beijing and Moscow are said to be negotiating the purchase of 100 strike drones, which could be delivered as soon as April. And this does represent a major escalation, which everybody should have expected. If you are not glued to Western propaganda, because Xi Jinping has basically purged descendants from his immediate circle, he is in favor of escalation. He is in favor of, it's fair to say that he's in favor of closing the tech gap with the United States for good. And he wants to ramp up, it is escalation. He wants to ramp up this tech race and this military race. And anyone who had anything opposed to say about that is now gone. At the Munich Secretary Conference last weekend, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken dispensed with the usual diplomatic niceties when he reported on his meeting with top Chinese foreign policy official Wang Yi, delivering a rebuke instead. Quote, "We are very concerned that China is considering providing lethal support to Russia in its aggression against Ukraine." Its aggression. Blinken told U.S. broadcaster NBC. And I made clear that would have serious consequences in our relationship as well. China reacted quickly with a foreign ministry spokesperson accusing Blinken of spreading disinformation. But information obtained by Der Spiegel, indicates that the planned cooperation between Beijing and Moscow goes even further than Blinken makes it sound. But when Foreign Minister Yi said that, what he was talking about was how Blinken characterized their interaction. All right. I mean, we went over this earlier in the week. Yi had no problem making it public that he berated Blinken again. And we all saw it live the first time. When you tell somebody 2 feet away from your face that you're weak and you're not in a position to demand anything of us, it's a diplomatic spanking. A warhead up to 50 kilograms in weight. According to that information, the Russian military is engaged in negotiations with Chinese drone manufacturer Xi'an Intelligent Aviation Technology over the mass production of kamikaze drones for Russia. The revelations create a new urgency in the debate over possible Chinese military support for Russia. And this was like the funny thing, the people who responded to Mike Tracy on Twitter earlier this week. Like, oh, China's not going to do that. Yes, they are. They're going to take every opportunity to bloodlet the United States and NATO that they can. They've been doing it for when it comes to Iran, when it comes to North Korea, they've been doing it. We just haven't been so dumb as to commit our own forces and resources where we could actually be bloodlet. But they have been supplying people, and that are supposed to have sanctions against them. They have been the end round of that. All right. Bingo has reportedly agreed to manufacture and test 100 ZT-180 prototype drones before delivering them to the Russian Defense Ministry by April 2023. Military experts believe the ZT-180 is capable of carrying a 35 to 50 kilogram warhead. Sources believe that the design of the unmanned aerial vehicle could be similar to that of Iran's Shahed 136 kamikaze drone. The Russian army had deployed hundreds of them in its attack on Ukraine, where they used Iranian drones to target residential buildings, power plants, and district heating facilities, often resulting in civilian casualties. Yes, well. Do we have to talk about the 2014 massacre in Odessa? Coming up on the anniversary of that, too. Civilians get killed in war, folks. They get hurt and killed. They get maimed and killed. That's what happens. Plans for falsified shipping papers. In a further step, Bingo reportedly plans to deliver components and know-how to Russia so that the country can produce around 100 drones a month on its own. China apparently already had plans last year to provide the Russian military with much more substantial support than previously known. Of course. According to information obtained by Der Spiegel, companies under the control of China's People Liberation Army had planned to deliver replacement parts for Russia's Su-27 fighter jets and other models. Those things are pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. Der Spiegel has learned in its reporting that plans had apparently already been made to falsify shipping documents to make the parts for military aircraft appear to be replacement parts for civilian aviation. Can I tell you just a little bit of a secret here real quick, folks? We do the same thing. And so do our allies, by the way. The British did it for decades with Iran. Decades. British businessmen and companies did this. So did French, by the way. In January, Dutch public broadcaster NOS reported that Dutch microchips had been delivered to the Russian defense industry via Chinese companies. According to the report, an analysis by the Ukrainian forces of seized Russian offensive weapons like rockets, helicopters, and drones, or their remains, showed that microchips from the Netherlands had apparently been installed in 10 of 27 Russian weapons inspected. For months, reports have been circulating among security officials in a handful of countries that Chinese companies have been providing satellite images of combat zones in Ukraine to the Russian side. In response, the U.S. government recently placed the Chinese satellite company Changsha Tianyi Space Science and Technology Institute on its sanction list. So what? Washington claims the company's images have been obtained by the Wagner Group, the Russian private mercenary unit notorious for its brutality to enable, quote, combat operations in Ukraine. By the way, if you recall, it was also one of that schmuck's talking points that if the Chinese did do anything, that we would just crush those companies with sanctions. Does it seem to have mattered? Did it matter to Changsha? Apparently not. They've been on the sanction list, and it doesn't seem to coercing their behavior. It doesn't seem to be effective at coercing their behavior at all. Civilian drones reportedly used for war reconnaissance. The government in Berlin also has information suggesting that China is also developing commercially available drones to Russian customers that can also be used for reconnaissance purposes as part of the war in Ukraine. Military officials refer to these devices as dual use because they are of utility in both civilian and military applications. I mean, folks, let's be real in all truth. Any drone could be dual purpose. If your kid could be playing with it and taking pictures of the nearest body of water, or you could be using it for recon as well, which you then funnel to some entity. According to information obtained by Der Spiegel, the drones are delivered to Russian forces by Chinese-controlled import-export companies via the United Arab Emirates. People familiar with the analyses of these deals say that the evidence exists indicating that Russian forces have in fact deployed such drones to conduct reconnaissance along the front in Ukraine. This could be one reason that both German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock addressed the issue of possible military support from Beijing for Moscow in conversations with Wang at the Munich Security Conference. Quote, I said clearly in my last conversation with representatives of China that this cannot be accepted, the Chancellor said on the political talk show Maybrit Illner, I don't speak German, on public broadcast ZDF. I mean, that might matter, what you say, Chancellor, may matter if you had a legit military, but you don't. You're not Otto von Bismarck, bro. Sources told Der Spiegel that Wang reacted coolly when confronted by the Germans. He reportedly said that China's playing by the rules. Of course, he doesn't have to listen to Germany. They're not the powerhouse they were. The post-World War II order saw to that. They're all bark, no bite. They're a paper tiger. The Chinese have no reason to listen to them whatsoever. And by the way, that's right. An earlier version of this article identified Wang Yi as Foreign Minister of China. His current title is the Director of the Office of Central Foreign Affairs Commission of the Chinese Communist Party. We have corrected the error. Yeah. Shake up. The Chinese Foreign Ministry also denied weapon deliveries to Russia without addressing the specific allegations. Quote, "It is a known fact that NATO countries, including the U.S., are the biggest source of weaponry for the battlefield in Ukraine. Yet they keep claiming that China may be supplying weapons to Russia." Foreign Ministry spokesperson said in a statement to Der Spiegel issued through the Chinese embassy in Berlin. Quote, "This is a familiar trick used and exposed soon after the Ukrainian crisis broke out. We urge NATO to quit groundless speculations and smears against China on the Ukraine issue." Again, it doesn't really seem like, that their demands mean a damn thing to them, does it? Because it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. Nothing they say has any bearing whatsoever. Meanwhile, you have China, hashtag Russia is losing on Twitter right now. Even though just about the same amount of people think Russia's winning as Ukraine is winning. But now, stalemate's up to 48% with a huge chunk, about 15% almost, saying they're not sure who's winning. It's a minority, but it's a loud one. That was in May, by the way, for people who want to know what I'm talking about. Oh, it's like right after the coup. As soon as the U.S. engineered the coup in Ukraine and toppled a democratically elected government that was more favorable to Russia, they just decided to. Do you want me to show the pictures? They burned in some people alive in Odessa. It was a friggin' barbecue. It was a barbecue. The burning of human beings is one of the most disgusting things you could ever witness. It's horrific. The smell is unnatural. Actually, I guess it is quite natural, but it's so horrific. So horrific. It's like nature trying to tell you this is a specifically evil act of violence. An especially evil act. So yeah, at least Stoltenberg was being honest when he said that the war started in 2014. It did not start in last year. And by the way, good for the U.S. and the Ukrainians, because the Nazis did something very similar once in the same area. All right. Oh, boy. Anyway, yeah, I'm just looking at something somebody sent me. Oh, God, this democracy stuff. We got to save democracy. Book club, can you answer this riddle? Hold on. Or anybody for that matter. I put it on Twitter and I put it on Locals before. Let's take a look at it real quick. Here we go. Let me grab this one, grab the status, throw it up there so you all can see. Tell me, folks, what myth is Mitt Romney pushing? Which myth of empire is being pushed by Mitt Romney right here, using to argue for war? He says it is in America's interest to support Ukraine. If Russia can invade, subjugate, and pillage Ukraine with impunity, It will do the same again to others. And a world at war diminishes the security of Americans. An emboldened and expansionist Russia may eventually invade one of our NATO allies, drawing America into war. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has devastated Russia's military, weakening an adversary. That's a good thing. And its undermining military performance has diminished its global standing. In 1994, as an inducement for Ukraine to relinquish its nuclear weapons, America made security assurances regarding Ukraine's sovereignty, and we will honor those assurances. A nation perceived as abandoning its commitments will have few allies when they are needed. We stand with our allies, blah, 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 blah. What myth of empire, folks? And I'm going to look around first. I'm going to you locals. Classic domino theory. Excellent. That is correct, Ian. That is classic domino theory. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, Jack Schneider, Myths of Empire. It is not true. The domino theory is garbage. It is a fear tactic. It didn't stop anything for us to have gone into Korea. It didn't stop anything for us to have gone into Vietnam. It is classic domino theory. That is the same crap that they used to argue for those conflicts that were meaningless, spend blood and treasure for nothing. It didn't change the balance of power. It didn't even disrupt the trajectory of the changing balance of power. Unless, you can argue that it in fact did weaken the United States, which made us weaker in the short run anyway. But it in fact did not help us at all. Nor did it really help our allies. And if Mitt Romney was so concerned about commitments made to people, where was her when Muammar Gaddafi was being chased through his own streets and stuck like a pig? Beaten to death by his own people. Gaddafi agreed to purge Islamic extremist groups. He did it. He agreed to give up his WMD programs. He did it. He did it in exchange for protection and for aid. He got neither. Where was Mitt Romney? How does that impact? It impacts when Donald Trump goes to Pyongyang and becomes the first person to step into North Korean territory since the armistice, the first president. And he's got to try to convince Kim Jong-un that giving up his ballistic missile program and his WMD program is not suicide. Mitt Romney didn't care about that. Maybe because Mitt Romney didn't have any business interests in Libya, and that doesn't happen to be the case now. And in fact, there were people who had business interests in Libya. Hillary Clinton, who's also making news. Her friend Sydney. And her French oil friends had a ton of business in Libya. That's the one thing Gaddafi did wrong. He did not want his nation's reserves, his nation's resources to be plundered by Western leaders. That's what Gaddafi did wrong. He made good on all of his side, his end of the deal. He made good on it. They didn't let him get toppled and murdered because, he's a bad guy. They did it because he was actually fighting Western influence, especially in the oil industry in his country. And because, hell, kill two birds with one stone, Obama did not want Libya to become a failed state, but Hillary Clinton convinced him. She needed an achievement, a crowning jewel, a feather in her cap, whatever else you want to call it. She needed a foreign policy win. Libya was supposed to be that. Western forces were going to come in. They were going to take control of the oil industry. It was going to become the new pearl of the Middle East. So much for that. Instead, it became a failed state. Mitt Romney didn't care about that. There is no NATO commitment to Ukraine. And he's talking about the Ukraine of 1994, for crying out loud. It's just unbelievable. It's not, though. It's not unbelievable at all. All right, so let's grab some questions here. I see Laura's been in there. What do we got, Laura? What do we got? Yeah, the Soviet Union did want to expand, but here's the difference here, and this is something we have to make clear. The Soviet Union was, when they could, an expansionist power, although there were limited opportunities for the Soviet Union to expand. They weren't crazy over-expanders. They weren't. They expanded where they saw opportunities, like great powers do. Not the good ones, not the bad ones, not the nice ones, not the mean ones, not the democracies, not the dictators, not the democracies, not the communists. None of that matters. Great powers expand if they feel that it's worth it, and they can, and they have an opportunity to do it. But Putin is not. I hate to break everybody's brain. Putin is not an expansionist. He's not. He has been a long time vocal critic of the Bolsheviks, as he refers to them. He doesn't want to reconstitute the Soviet Union. That is Western CIA bullsugar. He has criticized the Bolsheviks for overexpanding because of ideology and against the interests of actual Russian people. That was, as he viewed it, their biggest mistake. By the way, you could argue he was right. He's right about that. He has no intention of reconstituting the Soviet Union. He does, however, have a problem with a Western satellite state where, by the way, it wouldn't even have been one if it wasn't for a coup that the West waged in it, being on his border. Just like if he engineered a coup in Mexico and installed a pro-Eastern government, we would have a problem with it. Stop being so intellectually dishonest with yourselves. And I don't mean that of you, Javier, specifically. I'm just saying the people who believe this crap. If he somehow engineered a coup in Canada across from Niagara Falls, like, is another great example. And there was just like nothing that Golden Boy Trudeau could do about it over there. Believe me, Trudeau would have a major problem. The United States would have a major problem. They would call it Russian aggression. You're expanding up against our border. And they'd be right. But as that reporter said the other day, and I should run it again, just so because when you're pressed, when there's an actual journalist doing his or her actual job, then this propaganda falls apart. Russia has not moved. I mean, no, and not Joel. I just saw that, Lord, put on the screen. This is, and by the way, Turkey has been that has been a big sticking point for a long time. So is Poland, and it used to be Poland. This just goes to show you. Actually, I am going to play this clip again because he goes over the history of it. The sticking point used to be places like Turkey and Poland. Now it's Ukraine. NATO is expanding. They are the aggressor in this instance, folks. I'm sorry, but that is the truth. Let's see if Kirby can defend himself. If you saw this on Wednesday, I apologize for replaying it, but no doubt, looking at the numbers, there are people watching today that did not see this on Wednesday. I don't have to say anything. I don't have to add anything to this exchange. If there was an actual media, not propaganda, then this would be crystal clear to basically everyone. It's the propaganda that's blurring the lines here. But here's what happens when you actually get in a battle of wits and there's just no way out. There's nowhere to turn. There's nowhere to run. There's no way to throw a white towel in, forfeiting. There's just you and another guy and your two arguments and your two facts, your two versions of the facts. And one of them is going to be right and one of them is going to be wrong. And just remember something here. There's no opinion in geography. I'm going to roll it.
To look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
Okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for...
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to moved
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern
I'm
states.
pretty sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
It's not
Okay.
changed, but I'm
So,
pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia's decision.
if NATO has moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved, not
NATO
because
is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
Unfortunately, for 50 years it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So
Where's
do you
the
not
Soviet
understand
Union
it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat, and the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east, correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But
And
there's
so the
no reason
reason
for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, Matt.
It's like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hegel
We're
said.
blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security
which is
situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member. Which is not a NATO member.
I see to you
Other
on that
countries
point.
feel threatened.
It's just unbelievable amount of dishonesty. Unbelievable amount of dishonesty. He is such a liar. But what else would you expect from the mouthpiece who was solely tasked with hiding the threat from ISIS from you under Obama? Oh, it's not a big deal. We're talking about junior varsity, Obama said, remember? And Kirby would trot out there every day like the talking piece with his nose up Obama's ass as far as he could stick it and repeat the lies. I wouldn't call it a caliphate. I mean, there are some groups, shooting at people. And this part of Iraq has fallen. This part of Syria has fallen. This part of Iraq has fallen. They're breaking monuments, ancient monuments, dating back to the beginning of human civilization as we know it in Nimrud and elsewhere. Unopposed. U.S. trained forces are just laying down their arms and running for the hills and going home. Oh, it's junior varsity. It's just a couple of guys with a gun. And these guys have some really big mouths, and that's all. It's not that big of a deal. Videos. Hey, my name's James Foley. I'm going to get my head cut off right now. Folks, it's not that big of a deal. It's one journalist who got beheaded. So what else would we expect from a guy like that? NATO was a balancing coalition against the Warsaw Pact. It is now obsolete unless you acknowledge the following, which is the truth, that it is there to be an expansionist, an aggressor. People who are behind this policy have long advocated they would have loved to see Russia dismantled. dismantled and sold off piecemeal. Groups supporting this effort, it is doctrine. Regime change is doctrine for them toward Russia. There's no reason to feel threatened. Get at, folks, stop. Just stop. And by the way, I don't want to presume to know what's in Putin's head. All you do is presume to know what's in Putin's head, which is never what he actually says. It's never what he actually states is his goals and his policies. And when he makes an offer to go to the table to negotiate for peace, it's never reflective of what are in his key demands. And yet you're claiming up there at the mic you don't want to presume to know what's in his head. No, you feed what you think is in Putin's head to the American public, the BS that it is. Every single day you do that. Every single day. And by the way, 1994's agreement did not obligate the United States to give lethal aid to Ukraine in the event that they were threatened by anybody, let alone Russia. All it did was make them a call for a vote, which was kind of stupid anyway, because who had veto power at the Security Council? It was a hollow agreement. It's totally misrepresenting. Mitt Romney totally misrepresenting what that is. Kirby misrepresenting what NATO is. Everything. Kirby misrepresenting everything. There's not much to add to that, folks. And I'll tell you what. Hairway to Stephen. How are we not at war with Russia? Well, Stephen, that's getting closer and closer. It just is. You can't do what they're doing for much longer without expecting another nation state to declare that you have declared war on them, so they're in a state of war toward you. Now, obviously, Putin's not an idiot, and he's not going to take action that he doesn't feel like he necessarily needs to take. If he's got hundreds of unmanned kamikaze drones headed his way that can carry 35 to 50 kilogram warheads, you know, he probably will just bide his time until he can crash them into Kiev, And he probably won't even do that. He'll probably just aim them at the forces that keep trying to take back parts of eastern Ukraine, which, as far as Russia's concerned, has already been annexed. It's over. And the U.S. wants Ukraine to mount, in the 1-year anniversary, they want them to mount this massive spring offensive to try to take back the Crimea. And they don't really care how many Ukrainians it costs. They don't care how many lives get lost. They don't give a damn. They need a PR win. Because, as the poll showed, the propaganda war propaganda, like I said earlier, is the most powerful propaganda to counter, but it doesn't really last. You can't maintain it. Reality sets in. All right, so it's a good question. Ukraine is not NATO, so we do not need to be involved, Scott. That's right. Period. So much for the War Powers Act, Scott. So much for it. And this is a major problem with U.S. foreign policy. And it's not new. For decades and decades and decades, in the 20th century, Congress, because they're cowards who don't want to be responsible for bad decisions, completely abdicated their duty when it comes to war powers. The president is allowed to take action when there's an imminent threat, but he is not allowed to wage war on a country without congressional approval. Congress has not held presidents to that standard. And there's a reason. I just said it. It's not because that's not what the Constitution demands. It is. It's because they're cowardly little men who don't want to take responsibility for anything. They would rather just abdicate the duty and blame the president if and when something goes wrong. Basically, we're not living up living by the Constitution because we're not worthy of it. The people who are elected they're not big enough men or women. They're not big enough people. They're not people of character. And that's sad, but that's the truth. And you've had people like Ron Paul and Rand Paul and, so-called on the fringe of this issue. I remember in the 2012 nomination, Ron Paul basically saying you cannot unilaterally attack Iran without a declaration of war. And Mitt Romney during the Fox News debate, oh, this guy's out there, man. This is out there. You're out there, man. He's reading the Constitution verbatim. What are you talking about? He's out there. And sadly for Republicans at that time, most agreed with Romney. I'm not sure that's the case now, but most did in fact agree with Romney. They believed in that powerful, dynamic executive. And especially when it comes to war. And by the way, Ian, I think it was, look, the 1994 treaty with Ukraine only obligated the U.S. to go to the Security Council, which Russia sat on and had veto power. Exactly. In the event, and I think you meant event, right? In the event Russia broke the treaty. Nothing more. That's all it did. It damn sure did not obligate the United States to arm Ukraine, to send Green Berets to Ukraine, to other advisors to teach them how to use M1 tanks, to have the whole logistical tail that comes along with F-16s and javelins, ODAs to teach them how to fight. This is crazy. Yeah, Tatone wrote, the only time since World War II that Congress tried to take back their war powers, is when Trump tried to pull out of Syria and Afghanistan. Without a doubt. Do you remember that? The only time they flexed their war power muscle is when a president actually tried to stop a conflict. I'll tell you what, one of the craziest, but also most informative, I guess is the way how to say it, really showed you who was what it all was about during the Trump administration. One event was in the spring, I believe it was April of 2018 or 17. I have to go back and look at it. We had a report on it. People Spun It Daily at the time. It was a unnamed sourced report, but it was obviously true. We wouldn't have published it if it wasn't. And it was proven to have been true. But Trump basically goes in and he had basically said, listen, and I forgot the name of it, but Operation something in Syria, which was couched in terms of, it was sold to you, the American public, as a humanitarian effort in Syria to aid the suffering of women and children, that are suffering because of the civil war. It was a load of crap. That was a cover story. It was definitely regime change to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. And Trump was over there trying to engineer a way out of Afghanistan. And he finds out, that he had ordered these people to end that operation in Syria, and it was over. By the way, Joe Kent's wife died because they didn't listen to him, because the military-industrial complex thinks they're above the president, and the deep state thinks they're above the president. And when they don't like something the president orders, they just ignore him, which is what they did with Trump. And Joe Kent's wife is dead because of that, folks. She should have been home, tucked in bed with Joe and the kids, safe and sound. But because they disobeyed the president of the United States, she is not. Imagine if a Democratic candidate with that story was running last cycle. Think about it. And it was George Bush or Donald Rumsfeld who didn't listen, right? Their Defense Department. Ho, 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 ho. Joe Kent would have been made to be like a hero, which he is, by the way. Instead, they smeared him as an extremist, even though his family has given the ultimate sacrifice for this country. When these pieces of dirt haven't done anything, they've relied on 25 states to defend them and their way of life, or the sons and daughters of 25 states. Anyway, I digress. Trump goes into the Situation Room and he found out they didn't listen, and he was like, this is over. If it's not, there'll be hell to pay. And by the way, while you're at it, we're out of Afghanistan. So I want a plan by whatever time period. And he's talking to Mad Dog. I know you like that name so much, Mattis, so I'm just going to give it to you. He was talking to Mad Dog, and he said, I'm not around. This is over. And we're pulling people out of Afghanistan. So the next time we're all in this room together and I ask you for a plan, you better have one. They flipped out. Mattis ran to CNN. McMaster ran to MSNBC and the New York Times. And then that's what you're talking about, by the way. Around that time period, that's when Congress decided all of a sudden to show some cojones when it came to the War Powers Act. Well, no, this would be reckless, and basically the entire global order will collapse if Donald Trump gets his way. Unbelievable. So yeah, this is some really good questions here. Here's one that's off topic, but I want to get to it. Trump has been pushing for GOP harvesting ops to counter Dems' fortification in 2024. How do we counter endless vote counting and post-election day ballots propped up by corrupt election officials and uniparty governors? That's a fantastic question. And the best way, I tell this to everybody, the best way to guard against, this a seemingly never ending until the margin flips, a deluge of mail-in ballots that just keep coming. The best way to do it is to vote. And I don't mean vote, but I do mean vote. But gather the more ballots you take and have cast in your favor is that many less than they have to do that with. And I'm trying to walk a line here. But the best thing that you could do to protect against this stuff is high participation. And if you're doing your own harvesting op, all right, then that would be huge. I will say this. I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but some state parties and Republicans, it depends. Like we had Drew Born on to talk about Michigan. Some state parties have plans, and people who were running for them had plans to have their own ops so you can benefit the party no matter what, top of the ticket or the bottom of the ticket. And that's great. But there are other state entities and, state committees and other entities that are not going to be able to raise money to be able to do something like that, which is why people like Barnes and I have really seen an opportunity for third party to do it. Unfortunately, with the exception of Barnes, who knows the law, and me, who knows the infrastructure and how this goes. And by the way, not just the infrastructure process, right? Anyone else who would try to pull something like this or develop an organization like this is just going to be a major grift, and don't give them a dollar, right? So we'll see if a certain somebody is running for office or not, but we could have a pretty major announcement here soon. We would be thrilled to have them on board, but I want to go much further than that, but this has to be done. And if it's not, we're going to have these elections cycle after cycle of one or both or one side after another thinking an election wasn't fair. And maybe down the road, these rules get changed and then everyone can have more confidence and faith in them again. But I'm thinking that it's just not going to work well unless Robert and I do this. So we are going to do it. Hold on one second. Oh. Wow. Sorry, Laura.
You can't be oohing and not say anything.
Well, because I'm sure it will be embargoed for a little bit, and I'm not sure if it's a private survey or not, but may have some nuggets for them on Monday. I told them, call me after 2:00. This happens a lot. Other pollsters will call other pollsters and say, listen, I just was in the field with something. I would like to get your take on what I'm seeing. And somebody just hit me up, and you'll know him. You know him. And it's a really interesting topic. Plus, it's relevant, Laura, to what I was just talking about, because I'm sure he tested certain candidates and who would do better against somebody in 2024 in a certain Senate race. So if a certain somebody does not run for Senate, then he'll be very interested in joining our little effort. I think we would be a dynamic trio. I think we'd raise a ton of money. And I think we would actually do something that Republican consultants and activists have just not been able to do for years. Because the truth of the matter is, and Laura can tell you guys this, every time we get somebody will come to us and ask us to give them consulting on how elections are conducted in this country, in different states and whatnot, they just don't know. Nobody on our side really has a full understanding of certain things. Brainerd took a lot of time to learn. He knows some of the in and outs of some of these states, but for the most part, they don't know, Laura, right? I mean, they really don't know how elections are conducted and what is possible, what's legal. They're just totally in the dark. They don't get it, but we need a big name. So a big name. And it needs to be somebody who's kind of like young because we care about the image, right? That the new image.
You're the worst with keeping things to
I
yourself.
know.
You can't.
Because I'm excited about the potential for this, Laura. You saw me dancing around the other day because I really think this is where all of the meat and potatoes are. Everything else is just like crap. It is. This has to be handled first. And there are a few people that understand that. So I don't want to say it's slim pickings, but it's kind of slim pickings. Like, so when I'm looking around thinking, who can I get to do this and help us with this? When you think somebody's good for that role, but then you pick up the phone and you call them and they don't seem to comprehend the situation. Right. So that's why I was thrilled. And we should have something for you guys really, really soon on this because somebody else has to make a decision about whether they're going to run for something or not, which will dictate, and if they're serious or not.
And the difference is, though, between you and everybody else is the team that you're putting together are actual people who actually work. And so you're a bunch of
off. Yep.
You're all a bunch of work-driven maniacs. In a good way. I'm done.
Everybody hear Roro over there? Woo! Glenn says our entire government is now comprised, I think is what of special needs personnel. Glenn, it's true. Kirby, look at this imbecile. Austin, who not only was a failure, but actually, for those of you who don't know this, General Austin, who is now the Secretary of Defense, an imbecile by all accounts, all right, failed at everything big that he's ever tried to do, just so happens to believe that let me put it this way. He doesn't believe in the founding principle that the military should be under civilian control. This is who is the current Secretary of Defense. The current top diplomat doesn't believe in diplomacy. And Pete Buttigieg is the transportation secretary. So, whoa, we're friggin' doomed. So is Glenn's comment that far off? No, it's not. By the way, Pete Buttigieg was in and out of East Palestine, boy. How fast did he get in and out of there? He didn't want to have to deal with actual real people. So he early in, early out. Meanwhile, Trump at his finest at that McDonald's. I don't know if you guys saw it, but Trump going and visiting East Palestine and then stopping in that McDonald's and just BSing with people, giving out hats and talking about, their favorite value meal or whatever. That's the Trump who could, really do damage. This is why Pete Buttigieg was in and out of there, by the way. And this is why Biden went to Eastern Europe instead of Ohio. He's just not popular. These people would not be welcomed in this area. For those who don't know, Columbiana County, all right? This was, just so people understand, Trumbull, Mahoning, right? All of this was Obama country. If you look at the map and you know what? We're going to do that. We're going to do that, folks. Yeah, we're going to do that. I will even give Republicans the benefit of the doubt, and we'll go to the map between Romney and Obama. Okay? Will be easier on Republicans. Here is, let me see if there's a way I can easily switch back and forth for you guys. Here is, no, there's not. Just for, while we're looking, I'm going to pick out 3, although there's a lot, there are clearly more. Astabula, 61% for Trump, 37% for Joe Biden. Trumbull, 55 for Trump, 44 for Joe Biden. And Mahoning, which was close, but Trump still carried it. And then right below it, you have Columbiana County, where East Palestine is, 72% for Donald Trump, 27% for Joe Biden. Now, here is Romney versus Obama, okay? Major difference. And let me get you the margin specifically, even though one of them I actually remember. All right. Obama carried Ashtabula 55 to 42.4. Or you could just say, because I didn't give him his, I didn't give Obama 55.1 to 42.4. All right. He carried, let's go to Mahoning. Obama carried Mahoning 63.4 to 35.1. Major difference. Major difference, folks. And this is the area we're talking about here. By the way, Romney barely carried Columbiana County. I mean, not by Trump margins. Trump got 72% of the vote. Romney got 54.7. Obama got 43% of the vote in Columbiana County. So, I mean, just a major difference. Oh, I forgot about Trumbull. How could I forget about Trumbull? Trump swung Trumbull both times, obviously, but in 2012, Mitt Romney lost Trumbull County by 23 points. Roughly 23 points. 60.5 to 37.5. Romney got his ass kicked in these areas. So don't think for a second, ladies and gentlemen, that making a mistake and going back to the party of Mitt Romney and cheerleading for Ukraine couldn't cost the Republicans, because it could. You simply cannot have that stuff happen and hope to win places like Ohio. I mean, Trump obviously, we're bouncing all over the place here. I hate it when it does that. I love the effect, but you got to get it right. There we go. Again, look at that swing. Look at that swing. Look at that swing. Look at that swing. And Wood, by the way, was another one. Fulton, Henry, William, Defiance, Hancock, Wood. Wood was 53-43. Obama carried Wood 51.2 to 46.4. Believable. I have not been in contact with Jeff DeWitt. That's a very good question. Sidekick sucks. Campaign sidekick, which is what they're referring to, is not good. Did not do this for Republicans or anyone in Arizona, but it is not at all. The problem is, what are you saying is, has Rich been in contact with Jeff DeWitt? He made some statements about replacing Sidekick, but also that there aren't many data vendors. Is this really true, or is he still trying to stick with right-leaning vendors? Lamont, that is a fantastic question. There are plenty of vendors, one specifically, that is very, very good. The problem is if Jeff DeWitt intends to stick with those right-leaning vendors, all of that data will suck. The left-leaning vendors are better. And from California to New York to Florida, they repeatedly come to us every cycle because they know that their data is stale. They have serious database latency issues. And Laura and I, and when it's not just Laura, Big Data Poll has long-standing relationships with left-wing vendors. And I'm not ashamed of that at all. They're better than right-leaning vendors. We have the best database in the country. It's overlaid with other databases. We can match voters to consumers to donors. It is much, much more sophisticated than anything that the RNC, the NRSC, the NRCC, or the GOP of cross-state parties, way more than anything that they have. To include Rona's billion-dollar data operation. It's not even close, which is why Democrats are so easily able to outmaneuver them, because they're way on top of it. They know when a voter's activity has been updated way before Republicans do. Their contact information is better maintained, whether it's an address, an email, a phone number. Their behavioral attributes attached to their voter record are more sophisticated. Republicans have nothing beyond whether or not they voted in some elections over the last 4 cycles or not, and then whether or not they believe they're a moderate Republican, they're a strong Republican, a conservative. They don't really know. Sidekick sucks. I can tell you right now that there are a ton of Trumplicans in Sidekick that are listed as moderate Republicans. Why? Because they don't have long-standing vote history, and because it's so simple. It just simply goes by, did they show up in this election and did they vote Republican that you know of? Or can you count on them to vote Republican? If somebody in Mahoning County voted for Barack Obama twice, that we were just talking about, but then switched and voted for Donald Trump twice, they would be considered a moderate Republican. All right? Same ditto Trumbull, ditto Ashtabula, and even Columbiana. Look at how many votes that man swung. Mitt Romney's 52%. 20-point increase almost. They would be labeled as somebody who would be put on the back burner. Don't get them out, because you can't trust that they'll vote for you or not. Their data sucks. And Derek, I saw that. Derek said, according to Joy Barrett at The View, these people in Ohio deserve what happened to them because they voted for Trump twice. I've also heard similar comments with older people who died from COVID. Joe Biden, it was Ron Klain, in fact, who was the source of that story. Fox News, like, unnamed source. It was Ron Klain who was giddy over the fact that, quote, the body bag count was going to be so much by the summer, and that they were going to be Trump voters, that the dynamic, the fundamentals of the race would be different by the time we got close to the fall. This is going back to 2020. He was like celebrating that Trump voters were going to be dead, that the virus killed Trump voters. If you ever said, Laura said, God help Republicans if they ever say anything like that about Democrats in a similar situation. Oh my God, Laura. Oh my God. And yes, Lamont, I would take Jeff's call, but they can't, they got to be willing to break the consultant class mold, which has not worked for them. And it's double. You know what's sad about this, Lamont? They wind up paying double anyway, because they're using their consulting services that are using Sidekick. And then they're coming to me anyway and saying, here's this list for this district, this whatever. Can you do a match for this? And we would, what we call deduping. I mean, yeah, you can call it matching. And we would append data that we had that they didn't have, or replace data that they had that was old. Why? That's a waste of donor money. You could have been running targeted digital ads with that money instead of paying me to fix your shitty list. It's terrible. Jane Fonda, quote, COVID is God's gift to the left. That's right, Dreary. That's right. Let's see. Let's get back to some, because we had some really good ones here. Laura Butler asked, if Taiwan is invaded, do we say not a NATO country? That's actually a really good question, and it's a legitimate question. For those of you who are against helping Ukraine, but pro helping Taiwan, I would love to hear that. I do think, however, there's a major difference here, okay? Because no one's trying to expand into Taiwan here. Like NATO isn't trying to expand into Taiwan or that area of responsibility, whatever you want to call it, AOR. No one's trying to do that. So it would be considered, an act of Chinese expansion if they were to do that. There are some serious economic concerns. You can take the moralistic crap and stick it up your butt for all I care. I don't care about Taiwan being a different kind of government than the other. I'm just being real with you. I care that Taiwan does, however, supply us with certain things that if they did take Taiwan, that the Chinese would be able to deny us, including pharmaceutical and military stuff. So there's a major difference. Like Ukraine supplies us with nothing. We get nothing from Ukraine, nothing. Our elites thought they were going to get shale deposits. Our elites thought they were going to get a ton of stuff because of the military complex, from bioweapons, development to other stuff. But the nation itself isn't getting anything of vital interest from Ukraine. That's just not happening. But it's a good question. It's a valid question. It is. And it's one people, Americans will have to decide whether or not that Taiwan is a vital interest. I, however, think, sadly, Laura, if you are pro-Taiwan remaining autonomous, or in their mind being able to claim they're autonomous, if you're pro that, then you cannot waste or bleed power in folly ventures like the one in Ukraine. Because what you're showing the Chinese is that you're stupid, number one. You're dumb. You're willing to waste power and waste precious resources, treasure, blood, materials on stupid ventures. And you're still not willing to put what they're doing is still not beating back the Russians. Like, ultimately, the way they see this is that the U.S. is just making little, commitments here, commitments there that are ultimately going to be going up in smoke. You might as well take a lighter to the dead presidents, burn them up. And then at the end of the day, Russia's going to get Eastern Ukraine anyway. And they're going to hold, they have it. They're going to hold it anyway, just like they did with Crimea. So every day this goes by gives the Chinese more and more incentive, or not even, but gives them more reason to believe that they could take Taiwan. And I honestly I didn't think we would be here just a little over 2 years into a Biden administration. I thought it would take a little bit more time than that, but quickly, unfortunately, I do think we're getting closer to that. Although I think we're still kind of far off, but I do think we're getting closer to it. It's a valid question. It is. It's a good one. Who do you think will win the Iowa caucus? Trump lost it in 2016. That's true. And let's take a look at Iowa in 2020. All right. Iowa has the highest number of pivot counties in the entire map, the Electoral College map. All right. Just so people who don't know, I think I actually have it here. I do indeed. What do I mean by that? 31. Iowa has 31 pivot counties, making it the most of any state that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and Barack Obama in 2008 and 12. These 31 pivot counties, representing 26.11% of the statewide population in Iowa, have correctly projected the national election result more than 70% of the time since 1960. Of course, that makes Iowa another what? All right, so who do I think would win it? Well, in 2020, I think that there's a problem for a traditional we used to have the conservative wing, right, in Iowa, like a Ted Cruz or a Rick Santorum. He wound up doing better than expected, if you remember. I think they robbed him. I do. I think they robbed Rick Santorum like they robbed Bernie. It's different, especially on the Democratic side. It's rather easy to rob somebody when you have an app that doesn't work. They misallocated state delegate equivalents to Pete Buttigieg. That should have went to Bernie Sanders. We gave that information to the Sanders campaign. They didn't know what to do with it, but it happened in real time. Look, we were not alone in this. Even Nate Cohen at the New York Times had saw it as well. He just didn't see how in depth like we did, how it was not an accident. It was intentional. I mean, you clearly know when you add up these SDs, you clearly know who they're supposed to be allocated to. They were allocated to Pete Buttigieg intentionally, misallocated. And the goal was, of course, to blunt Bernie's momentum. But anyway, that's the Democratic side. On the Republican side, you typically had your different lanes, the moderate lanes, the conservative lanes, and some would fight in that moderate lane. And the conservative would win out. Then they'd go to New Hampshire. The moderate would typically win out. Whoever wins South Carolina is probably going to get that nomination. That's the way it goes on the Republican side. In South Carolina, the electorate is more moderate than people think it is. That's why Trump kicked Jeb's and everybody else's butt in 2016. In 2020, you could see that there was a push in Iowa, New Hampshire, and elsewhere to try to embarrass Trump. It didn't work. And Trump consolidated everybody pretty significantly. I don't know how, because they're not going to be able to they're not going to outflank him on the moderate side. They just won't. I don't know how, with all of those ex-Bernie voters from 2016, now fully Trumpers, I don't know how there's room for a traditional conservative candidate. That's the only option they would have. The problem with that conservative candidate's going to have is what was a major issue in the Iowa caucus for the last 30 years on the Republican side. Can anybody answer that for me? What was the litmus test in Iowa on whether or not you were the conservative candidate, truly conservative candidate in Iowa? Somebody look on locals first, and I could see Blondie's typing. But what issue was the one that all those conservative candidates used? That's right, Jerry or Spider got it. It's Roe v. Wade. The issue was abortion. Nobody can beat Donald Trump on Roe v. Wade. Nobody. Get it, Laura? Nobody, baby. Nobody. It's just impossible. For years, for decades and decades and decades, George Bush, right? And even the moderates who were faking being conservative, John McCain, right? They would all say, "Oh, I'm the most pro-life person here. You can count on me to give you those conservative justices. Look at what George Bush gave you." In fact, I would argue that Trump has both those lanes. There has to be some dramatic change in the dynamic of the Iowa caucus. And it's not going to be just those. And I think from 2016 on, and he did lose it. I forgot who asked that. Let me go back and look at it. But he did lose it, but he barely lost it. He was not expected to do that well. So it was Chris 41. Chris, he wasn't expected to do that well. We can actually find it, look it up. I don't know that we had our own map back then, did we? I don't think so. I unfortunately don't think so. No, we didn't. That sucks. I was really hoping we did. All right, but I'll just get the wiki up, and it'll show you by county, and you can see where Trump won too, which is pretty interesting. All right, Laura, you got to keep this up here for a second, okay? So here's the results of the 2016 Iowa caucus. You could see that Trump, he only got one delegate less than Cruz. It was 2 points or 3 points that separated them. And actually, Cruz only managed to win that because he ran a dirty trick against Ben Carson. He did. And I don't mean to laugh because it was screwed up, but it was totally valid. Dirty tricks are for dirty tricks. Oh, crap, Laura. I rolled right over that sponsor break. I'm sorry. I'll do it in a second. But basically, the Cruz campaign had been running robos and sending out, because they had a good organization. They had a good infrastructure. You kind of need that in a caucus. It's amazing Trump, who didn't even have precinct captains in most of these places in the Iowa caucus, still did this well and damn near won it anyway. But without Ted Cruz convincing some of Ben Carson's people on the ground that Ben Carson had dropped out at the last minute and endorsed Ted Cruz, then it is very, very, very likely that Donald Trump would have won the Iowa caucus. And we, during the break, I'll look for it. We had an analysis on People's Pundit Daily about that, doing the math, and it absolutely was possible. All right, but you had some of these people, Ben Carson, Marco Rubio did surprisingly well, but that's because he tore into some of the moderate wing, which Trump was riding there. Trump did way better than any moderate would have been expected to do at that point in 16. And you can see the counties that Trump won. Lots of those pivot counties are there. So it kind of foreshadowed how it could go in the general, and it did. All right. I'll take it now, Laura. I'm sorry. I totally forgot about I'm so glad. She's like, hey, what are you doing? And she's right. All right, let's roll with this. Whew. Yeah, so we'll get back to more about it when we'll get back to that when we come back from our break here. But junk science, that's what the doctors called many of those fruit and vegetable supplements. Junk science because they use extracts and common produce department fruits and vegetables with few health benefits. I take Field of Greens because it's the whole organic fruit and vegetable, not a watered down supplement, and it's backed by a better health promise. Each ingredient in Field of Greens was chosen to support vital organs like your heart, lungs, kidney health. Others support the immune system, blood pressure, metabolism, and healthy weight loss. I don't eat as healthy as I should. That's why I take Field of Greens. Like me, you'll probably look and feel healthier fast and have way more energy. But your best proof will be at your next checkup when your doctor says, whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep it up. Let me get you started with 15% off. Visit fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code TPP. That's promo code TPP for the People's Pundit at fieldofgreens.com. Laura and I actually just ordered more. You will feel better fast, without a doubt. Everyone's experience has been different, but nothing but great feedback from everybody. Check it out again once more. Promo code, like it is for everybody else, TPP. Go to fieldofgreens.com. All right, and more here. Jam and Bean, not only run by an artist of a coffee roaster, but patriots as well. All right, check them out. We got it up behind us right here. You saw me with the dill. Laura, I'm about to rock the sour cream and onion. I'm sorry. I cannot keep it as a prop much longer. Laura's like, you can't eat all the props. Watch me eat all the props. They're delicious. The gourmet popcorn is amazing. All natural stuff here. You're not going to taste garbage like you taste when you go to the grocery store, and it is affordable. If you check it out at Jam and Bean, JAMN Bean.com, and use the promo code TPP, get 10% off your orders. Whether you're using a K-Pod or you like to grind your own coffee, whatever it may be, they have an excellent selection for you, and it's all delicious. I'll tell you right now, I use K-Pods for convenience, even though I like both. And Jam and Bean, after trying a ridiculous amount of them, is the only legitimate medium full-bodied roast you will get in a K-Pod. You cannot get it like this anywhere else. The guys put a lot of effort into this, and they swung for the fences, and they definitely hit that home run. It's delicious. And it went one more time, jamandbean.com, JAMN bean.com. Use the promo code checkout TPP and get yourself 10% off while you support, like I said, great patriots in business. All right, rocking and rolling here. Where was I? We were talking about Iowa, right? Yes, we were. Let me see if I can find something for you guys. I'm going to do this on the fly. I mean, because it's Freewheeling Friday, I'm not really sure what you're going to ask. I can't look it up. I can't look it up ahead of time. But wait until it loads. Come on, load up. Let's go. Let's go. Oh, come on already. For the love of Mary. Let's go.
I like Snowman's comment.
What was it? I'm over here trying to look and search here. I hit the search button. It just searches for nothing. It's ridiculous. What was it?
I would argue that the Iowa caucus was a perfect segue into Field of Greens. Give that producer a raise. I like that ending especially.
Let's see. She's pretty good at her job. I'll give her that. There we go. So apparently, for some reason, you got to go to that search thing in order to actually search for something. All right. And by the way, in 2020, Donald Trump broke the record for the most votes received by any incumbent president in the Iowa caucus. I forgot about that. This time he had dispatched 80 surrogates in the Hawkeye state. In 2016, he didn't have that. So, it was tough. Interestingly, I'm just making sure that I'm getting the right one here before I go on with it. But there's caucus locations. Yeah. I'm just looking back and thinking about some of the stuff that had transpired in the Democratic primary. I just don't know how you can be furious if you're a Bernie supporter. And Bernie to not do, to not fight. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, by that December, Ted Cruz was the front runner, hands down. But a week before the Iowa caucus on January 24th, Trump began to really build a big national lead. We had an aggregate of polling back then, and he overtook Cruz 1 week before the Iowa caucus. So there was like this momentum building, and that's why I want to caution people about how early it is. In fact, Ann Selzer gave Trump the lead going into the Iowa caucus, and Cruz was able to pull that off. So she had a miss, and that's a pretty bad miss for her. It's a pretty bad miss when that happens. It's her state. It's not like she's out in somebody else's territory. Record turnout, record. I'm trying to find it, but there was, without a doubt, it may be just couched in caucus entrance polls, caucus site turnout. Yeah, Bernie wins Nevada. Wow, it's kind of fun going through the archive. It really is. Broke turnout records. Here we go. I'm not sure. Looks like Cruz also had some help from the Club for Growth, by the way, in order to get that message out. And that's interesting. Cruz did the full Grassley. That's a reference to visiting every county in Iowa, which has 99 counties. Chuck Grassley had been doing that for a long time. And if you do it running in the state of Iowa, or if you're running for president or whatever, and it's called the full Grassley. When you do every county, that's something it had been for a while. I don't see it, and I don't want to take too much time looking for it, but the math was interesting. It really was. And the math, without a doubt. A couple of these precincts awarded bigger chunks of delegates. And so it is possible, based on where they pulled this stuff, that Trump would have done even better, like because Cruz would have done that. It would have been more of a split. Trump would have probably gotten a little bit of that, but for the most part, it just would have been more spread out, and Trump would have been, ahead by a point or so. It's absolutely possible. I wish I could find it. It was really cool to look at, because it goes to show you how much, in a caucus especially, how much ground game matters, right? And without any real competition, Trump puts 80 surrogates across the state. That in 2020 totally changes up how it was being, how he was getting caucus goers from 2016. And he's not even running against anybody real, even though they did mount challenges to him. And he crushes them. And not only does he crush them, he gets the most votes out of any incumbent president ever. So infrastructure matters. Again, going back to what we were talking about before, what Barnes and I have planned. It is a big deal. I see people on Twitter all the time saying that no one wins Iowa without the Vanderplats and Steve Deese endorsements. Do you think it will matter this time? I really don't think it mattered last time. I don't. I think that little trick, that's it. That little trick was what did it. Yeah, that's true. Ian points out, and actually, I'd like to bring that up. There is actual legislation that it makes Taiwan different than Ukraine. That's true. I'm going to bring it up right now. I'll bring up the. It's like I almost don't. I almost don't trust the federal for the State Department on looking up the Taiwan Relations Act, because they don't want to talk about 79. And I just looked at the State Department's website about what exactly it means for U.S. obligation, and they're like completely ignoring the history of it. So instead, let's just do. I hate Wikipedia, but let's just do it. All right, because there are a couple really good questions about the difference between Taiwan and Ukraine. And Noble Gates says, I support Taiwan. I don't want to go to war, but they are 1,000 times more in our interest than Ukraine. All right. And Ian writes about the Taiwan Relations Act, and it states that we are legally obligated to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character. In other words, unlike the Ukraine, Taiwan does have a claim to American stockpiles. All right. So if you look at the background of this, though, all right, it was enacted April 10th, 1979. Since the formal recognition of the People's Republic of China. It was just amended last year. Or not even amended. There's another one I'll show you. The act has defined the official substance. This is unbelievably bad wording. Has defined the officially substantial but non-diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Taiwan. Background. In 1978, the Chinese Communist Party, and if there's something wrong, I'll correct it, administration of the People's Republic of China claimed to be, quote, a united front with the U.S., Japan, and Western Europe against the Soviets, and thus established diplomatic relations with the United States in 1979. The CCP also supported American Operation Cyclone actions in communist Afghanistan and leveled a military expedition against Vietnam, America's main antagonist in Southeast Asia. In exchange for this consideration by the CCP, the Carter administration canceled the Sino-American Mutual Defense Treaty with the Republic of China. And the Republic of China government mobilized its ethnic lobby in the United States to lobby Congress for the swift passage of an American security guarantee for the island. Taiwan could appeal to members of Congress on many fronts: anti-communist China sentiment, a shared wartime history with the ROC, Beijing's human rights violations, and its curtailment of religious freedoms. That was a big deal. Barry Goldwater, Republican Arizona, and other members of the United States challenged the right of President Jimmy Carter to unilaterally nullify the SAMDT, which the U.S. had signed with the ROC in December of 1954 and was ratified by the U.S. Senate in February 1955. Goldwater and his co-filers of the U.S. Supreme Court case Goldwater v. Carter argued that the president required Senate approval to take such an action of termination under Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, and that by not doing so, President Carter had acted beyond the powers of his office. The case ultimately was dismissed as non-justiciable, leaving open the constitutional question regarding a president's authority to dismiss a treaty unilaterally. The act was passed by both members of Congress and signed by Carter in 1979 after the breaking of relations between the U.S. and the ROC. Congress rejected the State Department's proposed draft and replaced it with language that has remained in effect since 1979. The TRA is intended to maintain commercial, cultural, and other relations through the unofficial relations in the form of a nonprofit corporation incorporated under the laws of the District of Columbia, the American Institute in Taiwan, the AIT, without official government representation and without formal diplomatic relations. The act entered retroactively into force effective January 1st, 1979. So they immediately wanted protection. All right. So the definition of Taiwan. All right. It doesn't, the TRA does not guarantee the U.S. will intervene militarily if the PRC attacks or invades Taiwan, nor does it relinquish it, as its primary purpose is to ensure the U.S.-Taiwan policy will not be changed unilaterally by the president. The act states that the United States will make available to Taiwan such defense articles and defense services in such quantity as may be necessary to enable Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense capability, and shall maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or social and economic system of the people of Taiwan. So I think and Ian, I'm curious if you agree. This is a Wikipedia editor nerd taking liberty, making a claim that really is not true. The fact is that wording is very, very clear that the U.S. does have to give. They don't have to put boots on the ground and fight, but they have to give the people of Taiwan the ability to defend themselves, which they have been doing. And I see that other question, Derek. We'll get there. That's a good one. No, I didn't mute. I'm just reading other questions because it does. I mean, look, as he quoted before, the TRA requires the United States to have a policy to provide Taiwan with arms of defensive character and to maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or the social or economic system of the people of Taiwan. I mean, I got to tell you, and it's pretty clear to me. I mean, it's pretty clear to me. So, reaffirmation, I believe in 2020, there was just something else passed. Or 2022. Let me look. I'm pretty sure something else was just passed. And here, I'll pull this down while I look. You guys don't care about that. But give me 1 second because there was something else that was just affirmed not long ago. The Taiwan Policy Act of 2022. Let's check this out. This may be what I'm thinking of. To support the security of Taiwan and its right of self-determination and other purposes. Bob Menendez and Senator Graham joint introduced this bill from the Committee on Foreign Relations to support the security of Taiwan and its rights. So did it get through? Is the introduced? It hasn't been passed yet. So, and it, we're in a new Congress now, so they'd have to reintroduce something else. But I guess what I'm thinking of is what they were putting on the wiki page, which was a couple years ago, about 3 years ago. All right. So Bonnie says, Iowans run around under signs in gymnasiums and precinct captains count people 2 or 3 times. I believe methodology is very open to fraud. The caucus has been a staple, all right, of the democratic process of electing a president by popular vote for a long time. Oh, there it is. I found it. I found the cruise thing. Ooh, I want to show this to you guys. I found it. So you're not alone, Blondie, in believing that there's been a problem with it for a long time. And I think that it's fair to say that it is exploitable because we've now had 3 caucuses in a row where there have been claims. Bernie's campaign, it's so funny because election denier. Bernie's campaign ran with it in 2020. They knew that they were robbed. Ultimately he was the recorded winner, but Pete Buttigieg claimed victory because of that mess up with the SDEs. And even though it was obvious, and even people like Glenn Greenwald are like, this is bullcrap. It's obvious what's going on. And he was right. It was obvious to anybody with a brain. And then you have, even on the Republican side, there has long been claims this one cheated, that one cheated. A lot of it is built on the honor system, right? And then who runs some of these caucus sites? Right? I've seen precinct captains put like 3 different hats on. And you said, that precinct captains count people 2 or 3 times. I've seen precinct captains then responsible for reporting numbers. But I don't know. I remember introducing it to Laura, years and years ago. There was something cool about it. It's supposed to be their heritage of like real town hall, face-to-face, populist, politics or populist political systems, where later on people would then blend or mischaracterize populism as progressivism, and they're not the same thing. They don't have the history that intertwine. But, the Midwest, the Plain States, they had this like very populist heritage. So I think it's very cool. I just think that in the modern era, there's a much better way of doing it to protect against, misallocating SDEs or, dirty little tricks. Unfortunately, nobody's had the appetite to do anything about it. All right. You know what? I'd like to show you, for instance, one of them, which is this Ted Cruz thing. I think that it's a good example of how you can. And by the way, Democrats in 2020 were saying that they developed this act as a way to get rid of some of these problems, and that this was supposed to be directly inputted. We were going to cut out some of the middlemen and these relays of the SDE counts. And at the end of the day, you don't mess up an app that badly, folks. An app that costs millions upon millions of dollars. That was, I believe, was totally intentional. Anyway, Cruz cheated. Evidence of effort to mislead Carson caucus goers is mounting. All right, so press reporting Carson to take break after Iowa. This was an email. Dear Don, breaking news. This went out, and I'm going to read you the background. The press is reporting that Dr. Ben Carson is taking time off from the campaign trail after Iowa and making a big announcement next week. What do you think that big announcement was supposed to be? That he's suspending his campaign. Please inform any Carson caucus goers of this news and urge them to caucus for Ted Cruz. For liberty! Spencer Rogers, Iowa, tedcruz.org. All right, so PBD had learned that caucus site supporters of Texas Senator Ted Cruz were falsely telling caucus goers that Dr. Ben Carson had suspended his campaign. Based on the reports and evidence, it would appear that the spreading of this false information was intentional and specifically targeted the supporters of Dr. Ben Carson because the Cruz campaign previously identified them as voters highly likely to back Cruz as their second choice. And folks, who could we know who these people were? All right. We know that they were involved in some dirty tricks against J.D. Vance this time around because they were the same group of consultings, the same Remington crowd. That is who worked for Ted Cruz. That is who identified Carson's people as more likely to be Cruz caucus goers than any others. So they hatched this cockamamie plan. And it's cockamamie, but I got to tell you, it worked. Breitbart News has obtained a voicemail audio that stands in complete contradiction to the defense put forward by Senator Ted Cruz, as well as Jeff Tyler, the campaign's communication director. Tyler specifically denied such calls went out, making these claims during an appearance on Hannity Wednesday night. And I could go back to Brid like I did the other day, but this is it. You can hear the voicemail, Carson dropping out, and it says from it, I'll just read the transcript. From the Ted Cruz campaign, calling to get to a precinct captain, and it has been just announced that Ben Carson is taking a leave of absence from the campaign trail. So it is very important that you tell any Ben Carson voters that for tonight, they not waste a vote on Ben Carson and vote for Ted Cruz. He is taking a leave of absence from his campaign. All right. Thank you. Bye. So they had these emails going out, and then they had these people calling precinct captains and calling people who had supported Carson. And, it was such a perfectly timed thing. It really was not enough time for like surrogates of Trump or Rubio or even Carson for that matter. I mean, who really got screwed here? Ben Carson. Did he have a chance of winning the Iowa caucus? Well, not for like a month and a half. He did not. No, it was very clear he was not going to be the winner of the Iowa caucus. But, I mean, he nevertheless is still the victim of this, the ultimate victim, even though it really prevented Donald Trump from winning. But, anyway, we need to go on it. But original to the backstory, there should be math broken down here, or at least, that's, where we see. Okay, here we go. On Monday, Cruz's team deployed some 12,000 volunteers with precinct captains in roughly 90% of Iowa's 1,681 precincts. He had a, like it stated, a data juggernaut in Iowa, a campaign juggernaut. He really put it all in Iowa because he figured if I could, as the conservative candidate, really dominate here, then I can build some momentum in these other states that I know I'm not going to do well in. I'm not going to do well in New Hampshire, but I may be able to outperform like Bill Clinton. And then when we get to South Carolina, there may be enough upstate evangelicals, downstate evangelicals, that I'll be able to put together a winning coalition in a fractured field. So that was the thinking, and he put it all in Iowa. All right. So that's a lot. 12,000 volunteers with precinct captains in roughly 90% of Iowa's 1,681 precincts, and county chairs and supportive pastors across the state. With such a significant ground game in place, it isn't hard for analysts to conclude the effort could have had a significant impact on the outcome of the Iowa caucus results. If Cruz's captains failed to sway just 4 votes, each based on this information, Trump would have won the Iowa caucus. All right, in each precinct, we're talking about 4 votes. That's nothing. Yeah, I'm just reading a little bit forward, but this does, for people who don't know, the entrance polls did not match the results. And of course, that's not unusual. They're not perfect, but it did help to explain the difference because it was such a big disparity. All right. He was not expected to win, even though we at PPD did have Cruz as the front runner. We maintained that throughout, even when Seltzer dropped her bomb, which was that Trump was actually ahead. Now, it is what it is. All right. So I thought that was worth showing. It's pretty neat. Dirty trick, but pretty neat. And then what happened, of course, 4 years later to Bernie Sanders was just disgraceful. Just disgraceful. I never saw such an outward, and the media said nothing. They said nothing about it. An apology to Bernie Sanders. Yeah, and then you have, Buttigieg going out there and claiming victory. It's just incredible. But it was enough to blunt the momentum. So that was a very long answer and an example of why I actually agree with Blondie that, we could do better now. I'm not saying give up your heritage, because caucuses are cool. They're cool. And if that's your heritage and that's what you want, then certainly, it's not a primary. But there's a way that it could be done now, even through somebody like me. It would cost like nothing to use software that we have to make it so much more credible. Preserve the integrity. It's almost no different than when we use that software for union votes or proxy votes, corporate proxy votes. It would be used as a caucus platform. And it should not be the way it is now. And like Blondie's right. And it's like they wouldn't be able to do that, Blondie, count people 2 or 3 times, if each of them was simply provided some kind of an API ID upon entering the caucus site. They get an API ID that now gets matched with the voter record in our system, and people, precinct captains, are simply responsible for reporting that back. And, an independent third party would be able to use that software and make sure that there's no double, triple counting going on, that there's no misallocation, because we would then be able to see how many people reported to that caucus site, how many votes were for each candidate, and whether or not those on the Democratic side, whether or not those SDEs are being allocated correctly or not. It's not hard. It's actually pretty easy. But to me, it's like in this modern age, if there's no good reason for them not to use the tools of technology to secure the vote, then there usually is not a good reason. You understand? Like, you understand what I mean by that? If there's no stomach to do something that's no brainer and would be so much more incredible is not the word, safe, secure, whatever. Why would anybody object to that? But they do, year in and year out. They want to control it. Barnes took his son to the Dem caucus in Nevada in 2020, then got bombarded with texts to get his mail-in ballot in during the last election. You got to give it to Democrats. And so they're evil, but they're cunning. That is exactly what I'm talking about. So because he showed up there to show them how it works, how it goes, and his son was participating, they just linked him, and not as a unique household. They linked him and they just nailed him and bombarded him like crazy. And by the way, you have big tech who's off helping do that, right? So he's getting hit with text messages, mail in your ballot, mail in your ballot, mail in your ballot. And Apple News is going, you need instructions on how to mail in your ballot. Oh, by the way, did you see that the Trump candidate is an election denier? How dangerous would it be if that candidate was elected? So they're like sealing the deal. What happened was so sophisticated, and it was multiple actors involved in this, and it cost a ton of money. But you do have to hand it to them. It's very smart. This is the age we live in now. I don't know why Republicans don't feel the need to do that. It's like they were playing a game they didn't even know the rules of. They expect Trump to pledge to support the primary winner to debate, but who followed the last pledge other than Ben Carson? Trump should just say, vote your conscience when asked for the pledge. I totally agree. I don't believe in this, vote R no matter what, vote D no matter what crap. That's institutionalized politics. No, I totally agree. They didn't do it for him, did they? And we all know John Kasich was lying, right? We all know everyone but Ben Carson was lying. Ted Cruz destroyed his career over it, which is why, by the way, we are not adding Ted Cruz to the list of nomination people. It's not realistic that Ted Cruz would be a viable candidate for the Republican nomination. It's just not. Some things you can never recover from, folks. So thinking ahead to the Republican nomination for president, for whom do you intend to vote? We have Trump, Haley, DeSantis, Pence, Pompeo, and Scott. And then no opinion, because that's Tim Scott, by the way, not Rick Scott. Although there has been talk about that too. I just don't know how serious he would really, think about that. Let's see what else. Ann Seltzer not publishing that poll in 2020 was like the end of my respect for her. I'm just going to be perfectly blunt. And that's sad because I used to, and Laura will tell you all, I used to, admire her quite a bit because she had the stones to drop results that were against the grain when she knew they were right. And after that, I'm sorry, that was it for me. Even Patrick Murray at Monmouth University was on my side of that argument. There was no good excuse to tank that poll. And they did it for Pete Buttigieg, crying out loud. And Biden, Pete Buttigieg and Biden. I think, again, Buttigieg was just being used as a foil. But, the fact that maybe one interviewer, had the zoom on the screen set too high, so Pete Buttigieg may or may not have been cut out as an example when she read the script, is crazy. You could do one of two things. You could remove her interviews from that day, or, remove her, period. It would have been nothing for them to just continued with an extra 20 interviews with some. And it wasn't even 20, folks. It wasn't even 20. It was nothing. That was no excuse to spike a poll, especially since we absolutely had a copy of it and we knew what it showed. Biden was getting killed. Bernie was going to win. Buttigieg, don't you find it funny, folks, by the way, that Ann finds Buttigieg isn't really doing well at all? He's not doing that well in the polls. Biden's getting creamed, right? Don't you find it funny that the guy who winds up bitching about the poll, and gets it spiked, is the guy who winds up doing better than expected for no other reason other than this plan to misallocate SDEs to screw over Bernie Sanders? Pete Buttigieg did not do as good as the final or even official count would suggest he did. We know even after some were corrected that it wasn't corrected fully. His performance was inflated. So and they know it. The Bernie campaign knows it. Everybody knew it. Again, even Nick Cohen at the New York Times knew it. Don't you find it a little bit funny? Again, nothing is a coincidence. They knew they were going to do that with that app, And they were going to misallocate SDEs to make it look like Buttigieg was doing better. So they couldn't have an Ann Seltzer poll come out showing that Bernie's killing him. So they spiked the poll. And I expect that from CNN. That's what they do. They are total propagandists. But then guess what? Don't partner with them anymore. There's no way I would have convinced the Epoch Times. The Epoch Times could have ever convinced me to spike our poll over something like that. I'd have leaked it for everybody and said, it's out now. You might as well publish it. But the truth is, they wouldn't have asked me to do that because some third tier candidate is complaining about something that may or may not have happened. No way. Yep, wristband codes even. Yeah, but we could be on that, Blondie, as they scan that wristband. Coming into the caucus, here's your wristband. Boop, scan. Goes right to our software. Who is that person? What number are they attached to? What API ID are they attached to? And then how did they vote? Because a caucus is not like a primary. People are debating with each other. Secret ballot is not a thing. It's not something you need to, require or promise. Your ballot's going to be a secret. Caucus is very easy to make legitimate and safe and credible. Gee, how not? Here's a secret for the GOP. Micro targeting. That's funny. Yeah. Who's psycho or us now? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's such a shame, Laura. It's such a shame. And Laura loves the caucus setup as she's writing now. It's cool. She says it's cool how they scream at each other. I love it. Personally, it reminds me, Laura, like how colonial politics were. I mean, or early republic, especially on the local level. Yeah, I wish I could read CSGOVOD statement out loud, but no, you can't. But imagine telling people 30 years ago that a country filled with over 337 million, right, firearms and stuff would sit by and deal this, and nobody would do anything about totalitarianism. I understand what you're saying. I understand your sentiment. I do. It's honestly one of my biggest fears because I don't think that that's going to be the case forever. It never is. It never is. In the history of human beings, it's never the case. Yeah, and Klobuchar could come out and claim victory too. Yeah. You guys remember. So got to most of them. 80s Aaron, it's a race to move the chip factories here. I check on that progress every week. Why were our chips made there anyway? That's what I'm saying. There's some real consequences to the Chinese taking Taiwan that simply are just not there for Ukraine because we just don't have anything like that we get from Ukraine. What else am I missing? I missed that one before, so I wanted to go back and get it. But you have to admit, that it is a question that has to be asked. And again, the best thing to do, the higher the participation rate is, the less pool of available, there is to exploit. So that's the best. The best defense is a good offense, just like Jeet Kune Do. It's no different in politics. Yeah, so it looks like we largely got through them. All right, yeah. All right, so don't forget little announcement before we go. All right, that Marshall sack is a noisy affair. It is. I love it. But it also has the way you could dial it down to 5 watts and make it nice and quieter without losing that much tone. Something is sucking my tone though. It's the wah-wah pedal, I think. Something is sucking my tone. I know I have is it you, K1? I know I got somebody in the crowd that designs custom guitars. I have a true bypass switch I got. Maybe you could give me, I'll look, I'm open to suggestions, but I'm about to do a wah-wah mod because I love the Wawa. It's a staple for me. But matched with some other pedals, like I have the Smart Gate on there from I'm at MXR all day. Jim Dunlop owns MXR. I got the custom audio electronics boost because I don't like distortion. I got the driving boost, the line boost, just to increase it for like lead. Chorus, MXR chorus, and a phase 90. All of them are supposed to have true bypass. The only thing that doesn't is the wah-wah. Something is sucking my tone and it's driving me nuts. I mean, if anyone's got any, I don't daisy chain. We use I have the mini ISO block, but I also have the regular ISO block. I don't daisy chain, but I'm telling you, something is taking an edge off of it. It's driving me nuts. So I'm about to try. I got these. They're right over there. I bought the buttons on Amazon and everything. The foot switches. I'm going to change it. I'm also going to mod the angle the foot switch is on. I don't need a stupid LED light. I don't care about that. Although I do want to change some of the capacitors and resistors to like boost the mid. Yeah, I don't know. I'm open to suggestions, but it's got to be the wah, right? It's sucking the damn. I'll show you the board right now. It's not. Oh well, I didn't. Next time because I didn't Velcro everything down. There's no daisy chain. Let me just phase 90. Okay, it goes from. Oh well, there is a boss. Wait, there is a boss TU3, right? Yeah, Chromomatic TU3 that I don't use as a mute. It's on all the time. True bypass, so I can see whether I'm out, and it just plays through. But it's supposed to be true bypass, right? So the Boss tuner wouldn't suck the tone. It goes from the Boss tuner to the wah, from the wah to the line driver, the boost line driver. You remember the old school line driver that had overdrive and line? Now this is the new one where if you don't want a preamp in there and you don't want extra gain, it just does, increases the decibel. But it's very, very simple. From the line driver to the phase 90 to the stereo chorus to the Smart Gate. That's it. The hell? It's got to be the wah. It's got to see the wah. I will be Neil Harris on there. I want to just make it's got it. Yeah, then yeah, it's probably the wah. I'm gonna mod that wah, Spice. I'm gonna mod it. And well, don't worry. I'm gonna start doing guitar streams. I told Laura earlier because I write. And I'm like, does this sound better? Does that sound better? I got to run this through GarageBand so I can just listen to the lead over it and see which one I like more. And that dawned on me. I have thousands of people who will listen to the show, and I get your opinion on it. And so it's getting there. Well, that's going to happen soon. And Spice, the Smart Gate does suck tone. It does, but I have it set really low, like where it just takes away from the, there's a buzz coming through. I mean, when you have the Alnico 2 Pros in the 57 gold top electronics, there is noise, but I'm not like a metalist. So the Smart Gate, I have it turned down. It just takes that like hum out, just enough to take that hum out. And that's it. So I don't even know. Isolate each pedal one by one. Yeah. So I'm literally going to have to pull it out. That sucks. Yeah. Yes, but let's get, I don't want to forget this. Neil says, I believe you'll be on the DSS. I will, in fact, around 12:30, but you guys should just tune in at noon. I'll tweet out the link. I'll put it on locals. I'll throw it all out there. I'll even share it on my YouTube, community post. I'll be on the Don Smith show tomorrow, which has some specials here and there. Don doesn't run all the time anymore, but he's going to have on some really good people, actually. And I'm going to be on there responding to some people who were talking to me about me. Christina Bobb will be on there. Dr. Malone will be on there. Robert Malone. So it should be really, really cool. And looking forward to it. I'll be on around 12:30, I think. But it's from noon to 2. Tune on in. It's going to be cool. It's going to be really, really cool. All right. I'm going to go eat my lunch. And then I'm going to do what you guys were suggesting. And I'm going to find the source of that tone suck. Because I had everything perfect. And I want to try to mod that Wawa, but I need time to do that. I got my soldering kit and everything. All right, I'm out. All right, guys, I will see you if you join with the Don Smith Show tomorrow. I'll see you then. Don't forget, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday, locals. Mearsheimer, Tragedy of Great Power Politics. We are now on 7. The Offshore Balancers. Perfect chapter for what we're doing, what we're seeing right now in Ukraine, and even talking about Taiwan. So prescient. So prescient. Perfect. All right. Thanks for watching, folks. All the best. Have a safe weekend as always. And more Inside the Numbers Monday. All right. See you soon. What do you got to say what do you got to say, Laura?
Deuces.
Deuces. See you guys. Thanks for watching.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a pet.